Hi everybody, welcome back to IndyCar on the last day of July, the 31st of July 2019, sorry. And today all the newspapers and the mainstream media are all over the fact that Boris Johnson is in Northern Ireland at Stormont, the building where Northern Ireland's Parliament should really be sitting and where the power sharing executive ought to be making decisions, and yet it still isn't. And for some reason, the Prime Minister thinks that his presence at the talks to restart the so-called power sharing executive is in some way going to make things better. Now, Boris, it has been pointed out by many people, particularly in Northern Ireland, is very far from unbiased in this, considering that he has already, or his party has already, given a £1 billion bribe to the Democratic Unionist Party for a confidence and supply deal. So in other words, no matter what Boris does in Northern Ireland, it will have to please Arlene Foster, the head of the DUP, because, well, after all, that's part of the deal, isn't it? That Boris and the DUP are now basically hand in hand. Boris Johnson attended the DUP's annual conference last year. So they are hand in glove, and there's no way that anybody could possibly think that Boris Johnson is in some way a neutral arbiter in this case. So he's wading into this whole process, hopefully having been briefed first at least about the politics in Northern Ireland. In the middle of this just now, in fact, if you take a step backwards for a moment as to why the power sharing executive was suspended and why control was re-centralised in London, the main reason for this was a spat between the DUP and Sinn Fein. Sinn Fein wanted a new, a piece of legislation to include the Irish language to be taught in schools in Northern Ireland as a secondary language, as a second language. The DUP said they weren't going to do that, and so the power sharing executive collapsed because the DUP and Sinn Féin couldn't agree on just teaching a language. I mean, that's all it was about. It was about the idea that Irish Gaelic or Gaelic should be taught in Northern Irish schools as an option. Nobody was forcing people to learn it, but this was too much for the DUP, who see any kind of Irish identity in Northern Ireland as alien to them. They regard themselves as British. So problems at the moment in Northern Ireland obviously centre around the Northern Irish backstop. And a lot of people talk about this backstop. Boris Johnson has categorised it as something horrific and terrible and undemocratic. But in actual fact, it is only a safeguard to make sure the border stays open. And that can only be a good thing in Northern Ireland for both the north and the south. There's no reason why anybody should fear that. The only fear comes from the British side. If the United Kingdom leaves the European Union without accepting the exit deal, now it's not a trade deal we're talking about here, it's the exit deal, in other words, paying their bills, separating the United Kingdom smoothly out of the EU with a transition period of 21 months so everybody can get used to the new regime. And all that the United Kingdom had to do was find a way of making sure that trade could happen across the border, which they said would be perfectly feasible with electronic means, and so the British government shouldn't fear it. So why is the British government so scared of it if, as they say, it's easy to change the way that businesses do their work across the border and have a system of electronic checks, and in effect a virtual border, if you like. And yet the British government says that the backstop's unworkable, that it's somehow unfair to them. It is the British government that wanted to leave the European Union. It's the British government which has created the problem, which has made the backstop necessary. But what the backstop really means is that it's going to become a blame game between the United Kingdom and the EU over who has to build some kind of border infrastructure across a vast area. I mean, I can't remember how many miles it is, but I think from memory it's over a 200-mile border with something like 206 roads, major and minor, that cross the border all the way along its wavy length. And although it's called Northern Ireland and the Republic, the Republic of Ireland actually has a northernmost tip, which is even further north than Northern Ireland, so it's not just like a straight line across the country. So how are they going to square the circle? Well, that's up to the British government. They created the problem, and it's their job to fix the mess they've made. And now they're saying, we're not going to fix the mess, we're just going to leave without a deal, and you can build a border. Basically, they're challenging the European Union to do what they won't do, because the British government does not have the courage of its convictions to put up a border, because they know that their electronic systems don't exist yet. So in the middle of all of this, you have two parties in Northern Ireland. Sinn Fein, who are predominantly in favour of Ireland reunifying peacefully, having got rid of the armed struggle 20 years ago and abandoned the armed struggle. Sinn Fein is now campaigning entirely for democratic change in Northern Ireland and reuniting both parts of the island into one large country. Now, it has to be said that the Republic may not be ready for reunification at the moment. The Republic of Ireland must have its own problems. There are big differences between the Irish system in the south and the Northern Irish system in the north when it comes to things like health and welfare. Very different systems indeed, and those would need somehow to be harmonised or changed in order to make that work. But Sinn Féin have said today that if Boris Johnson continues with this plan to have a no-deal Brexit, that they will demand a border poll. And the border poll would be asking the people of Northern Ireland and those on the south of the border as well whether they want Northern Ireland and the Republic to reunite and become one large country within the European Union. Now, the Unionists to this is anathema. To people like Arlene Foster, they would rather die of starvation in a ditch than allow Northern Ireland to reunify with the rest of the country. Remember that Northern Ireland is really just an annex. It is the last remaining outpost of an occupying force, if you like, in Ireland. For centuries, England had tried to conquer Ireland, eventually succeeded, and over the period of time, Irish people fought against them, won a battle. 1922 created the new republic, and at that point Britain annexed Northern Ireland. They built a barrier across, effectively like the Berlin Wall, and said, no, you can't have this bit, these 6 counties are ours, we're not going to let you have them, and we know the rest. So the situation in Ireland is a tinderbox, and Boris Johnson's blundering and the Tories' blundering means that there is a real danger to the peace process in Northern Ireland, and the peace that people have got used to is threatened by not only Brexit, but by Boris Johnson and Arlene Foster and their whole attitude. It's dangerous, and we know it's dangerous, and there is an easy way out of this. And nobody in Northern Ireland, even the Unionists, would need to fear reuniting Ireland, because it would be a long process, and it would be a process in which the Unionist voters of Northern Ireland would have a massive say, because they are a huge block of voters in Northern Ireland. And if the country was to reunify, that large block of people would be able to negotiate certain rights as part of the process of reunifying Ireland. And those rights, if they wanted to, could allow them to continue to think of themselves as British. They could hold dual British, Irish identities. They could have dual passports. They might even be able to arrange things like free travel in and out of the European Union. There are all manner of different things that could be done if the Unionists, and I'm not talking about the Unionist Party here, but I'm talking about the people of Northern Ireland who regard themselves as British, were to accept that if they want Brexit to happen at all, and if there's to be no deal, then they might have to accept that the island of Ireland should reunite, and their views are still important, and their views can still be incorporated into whatever Northern Ireland then becomes after reunification. Because Northern Ireland is always going to be a unique part of the island anyway. Its history is different, the people who live there have a different set of customs, a different set of traditions of which they want to defend. And although we might not agree with their traditions and their views, we still have to defend the right to hold opinions like that, despite the fact that we might not agree with them. We draw the line, I think, or we'd have to draw the line, everybody would have to draw the line at violence, bigotry, unfairness, inequality and so on. And the backwardness of the Unionist Party in Northern Ireland is one of the biggest problems. They're anti-abortion, they're anti-gay marriage, they're anti-everything that isn't strict Protestant, Calvinistic and boring, basically. They want Northern Ireland to be as miserable as possible, with the least amount of joy and the least amount of inclusion. That needs to change. That attitude would need to change in order for the North to reunify with the South. But it can be done, and people in the borders know this, and people in the border counties on both sides of the border in Ireland know that this can be done. And the only thing that really stands in the way of this is the politicians themselves. If the politicians were to give the people a poll, give them a chance to vote on what they wanted to do, I think you would be very surprised at what many of what you might call the typical Unionist voters of Northern Ireland might choose to do. If it meant being able to protect their way of life, and if you can imagine this for a moment, Northern Ireland as part of the European Union would get massive amounts of help from the European Union, new industries, new jobs. There would be connections there that they simply don't have access to at the moment. So instead of Northern Ireland being supported by a dead and dying empire in England, they would be being supported by 26, 27, 28 other countries, all working together and all supporting each other. There are many things wrong with the European Union, not least is their, shall we say, dogmatic approach to free market capitalism. That's something which the European Union needs to back away from now, because it is being seen, rightly seen, as being anti-democratic, very much for big corporations, very much for tax evasion. The European Union now needs to back down from that and go back to being what it was meant to be, a fair trading area and a place where the people of Europe could get along with each other and where they could join together and come up with ways which made Europe better, made it fairer, it gave them rights, particularly for marginalised minorities, such as the LGBT, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual and queer, and I think there's another one which I don't even know about in that grouping. But all of those people at the moment in Northern Ireland do not have the same rights as they would have elsewhere in the European Union. And that is the sort of thing that needs to change. And people in Northern Ireland are not stupid. The Unionist voters in Northern Ireland are modern and up-to-date people. They have mobile phones. They read what's going on in the rest of the world. And I'm pretty sure that they would quite like to get rid of the old-fashioned backward ways of the DUP and maybe just start again with something better. The future for Northern Ireland and the Republic could be fantastic if they're given the chance to vote on it. Boris Johnson and Arlene Foster will never agree to do it, though it will have to be forced out of them. Just in the same way that Scotland's independence vote is going to have to be forced out of the UK. Remember that in Scotland's case, the so-called Section 30 order was simply a part of the Scotland Act, which gave David Cameron the powers to suspend the usual rules of the Constitution and basically give Scotland this vote. Basically, David Cameron got powers from the Section 30 order, not us. He got the powers from the Section 30 order. By invoking it, he then bound England or the rest of the UK to agree with whatever the result was. And this was a bilateral agreement. It wasn't a permission given to Scotland to have a vote. It was to empower David Cameron to legally allow it to happen. In other words, to create the circumstances where David Cameron could hold a referendum. And actually it was Cameron's idea to have the referendum, if you remember. It wasn't Salmon's idea, it was Cameron who promised it. And Salmon just took advantage of the situation and went for it. So, although the referendum in 2014 might have been 5 years too early, at least proved something, and that is that the sentiment towards independence has grown massively since then, and the whole political landscape has shifted. It's changed completely. Brexit is, as I said, a corrosive substance to the United Kingdom. It always would be. And no matter what Arlene Foster or Boris Johnson says, Brexit will dissolve the union itself, because it can't do anything else. You can't force entire countries to wreck their economies because one country thinks it's a good idea and it suits them. It's just not going to work. You can't have a union of countries which is supposed to be fair and equal unless the countries who don't want to do something are respected. And that means unless Northern Ireland and Scotland are permitted to have a completely different relationship with the European Union, then Brexit will force the UK apart. It will destroy it. And it won't be the national parties of Scotland or Ireland that will do this. It will be the Tories that will have forced their own union apart. They'll be driving wedges between the countries. So I don't hold any hope at all for Boris Johnson today meddling in Ireland's problems, and I don't think he appreciates how complicated and complex and nuanced Northern Ireland politics is, nor how many disagreements and also how much low-level sectarian rumblings there are. There are still punishment beatings. There are still sectarian groups operating unofficially at low levels in various places, and that needs to go as well. And that's not going to go if there is a threat to Northern Ireland's economy. At the same time as this Stormont meeting is going on, the shipyard workers at Harland and Wolff, which is the main shipyard in Belfast, are on strike, and they're protesting at Stormont because the privatised shipyard, which the UK privatised, the new owners are in trouble, and it means the workforce in Harland and Wolff are likely to be thrown out of work again because the British privatised their shipbuilding industry. As well as that, we've also got the Irish language protesters also at Stormont, also shouting loudly, and now we hear that both the Irish language protesters who want the Irish language taught in schools in Northern Ireland and the shipyard workers are now shouting together, and some of the shipyard workers are even shouting in Irish. So you can see that Brexit is bringing together people who normally would not be on the same side, but they're on the same side this time. And everybody that I have heard from in Northern Ireland at the moment today is in favour of no Brexit, or if there's a hard no-deal Brexit, then a reunification vote. Let people choose, just as they should let people in Scotland choose whether we go along with this or not, or whether we choose our own path. Both Northern Ireland and Scotland deserve the right, as equal partners in the so-called Union of Equals, this precious union that the Tory party and politicians in England seem to have zero respect for. We deserve the right to choose. Northern Irish people deserve the right to choose, and I mean all of them. I don't mean, just nationalists. I mean everyone in Northern Ireland has a right to choose whether they go along with this or not. That's it for today. I'll see you all tomorrow. I will be presenting Scotland at 7 this evening because of a change in the personnel at the TV station. So I will be talking more about Boris Johnson's visit to Northern Ireland this evening on Scotland at 7. So hopefully I'll see you then. Watch on YouTube. You can catch up on other platforms as well. You can watch by live streaming as well. Anyway, see you all later on, and I hope you can join me tonight for Scotland at 7 on Broadcasting Scotland. Bye for now.